Earlier this year, I was talking to my dad on the phone, and he was telling me how, after an intense session of yard work at his new house, how he'd started feeling what sounded like symptoms of like carpal tunnel. 4 months later, he was dead. The disease that dad did end up having was a rare form of dementia called CJD. It's an Alzheimer's Parkinson's cocktail that shows its first symptoms and then runs its course all within around like 6 months. Grief is a different thing for everyone, and just like everyone, I'm trying to figure it out. On this channel, I feel a pull to kind of diary part of that journey publicly. After Dad's death, I began looking for resources of what art to watch or read to help process the grief that I was feeling. And I couldn't really find very much as far as guides or resources or people who were doing this in kind of a public setting. I hope if there's anyone else out there looking for that same kind of thing, that maybe the algorithm has led you here. This week, I'd like to talk about a movie that I was lucky enough to see in theaters a couple of weekends ago. Sarah Friedland's 2025 drama, Familiar Touch. This is a story about this woman named Ruth. She used to be a professional chef. She's since retired. She's living comfortably at home, but she started to have memory issues. And what this movie journals is the first few weeks of her living in a memory care unit. That transition from independent life into something else. The movie opens up in this idyllic, beautiful kitchen. Ruth is cooking breakfast, looks like for two people. The kitchen is like sun drenched, the windows are facing to her garden. She like reaches out and snips some herbs from the windowsill. Her closet's full of neutral basics and really nice fabric, and the art on the walls is sparse and expensive. It's very obvious this is a very curated life. A man enters the dining room and Ruth serves him breakfast. They start flirting, and he's her son, of course, but she doesn't remember that. He's promised to take her on a trip, and so she's really excited about that. He kind of rushes him out the door. He doesn't even finish breakfast. They get in the car. He says he forgot his jacket, goes back inside, and he returns with this like really large suitcase that he lugs outside. As they're driving along, she's asking more and more questions, and then they eventually pull into the circle driveway of an assisted living facility. And you can tell that she is clocked what's going on. As a side note, the lead in this, she is incredible. She's normally a stage actor, and her facial control is like insane. She's in a weird transition phase. She's not fully there. She's not fully gone. And a lot of that here or there performance is shown just through her eyes or her facial demeanor. And it's really, really impressive. So he leads her into the lobby and he tells her to sit down while he talks to the front desk. And the whole thing, we're seeing this from Ruth's perspective. She's the central character, and it kind of hit me how cold or out of control that felt, really. Like, it cuts to him at the front desk, and, you can't really hear what he's saying, but you see the front desk clerk look up and, say something on their walkie-talkie, which obviously that's part of their job and that's how they do it efficiently, but it feels, like you're a piece of cargo or something. Ruth puts up a little resistance, but not that much. Her son tells her she's been here before and that she was actually the one that selected this place after going and touring a bunch of places, but she doesn't remember any of that. She's led up to her pre-furnished room, and her suitcase is already there. It's this large rolling suitcase, but since this room is already fully furnished, how much of that suitcase can carry your home in it? And is that all you have anymore, unless you request something? That's just the first 20 minutes. The rest of the story is told in vignettes of Ruth's time, getting used to the new rhythms and routines that come along with living in a new home. At one point, she asks a nurse point blank, am I going to live here for the rest of my life? They pause and then say yes. So this is a slow movie. Friedland's a bit more interested in texture than she is plot. There are a lot of long poetic shots with not much action, which, if unearned, that kind of thing can be like a huge eye roll. But when done well, it works structurally, I think, to create pockets of dedicated time within the movie to think about what's going on. So if you don't have that much to chew on, you're kind of bored and just waiting for the next thing. But I think this does a good job of giving you something to think about. Now, I don't know if I would feel that same way if my dad hadn't recently passed. I think there's something about mortality and something that's interesting, but I think that I'm kind of clouded by my experience of the last year to know how effective this would be to other people. Movies like this used to scare me, you know. It's just this fear of death and loss of control, especially. But I'll say, for me personally, at least, in the lead up to the screening, well, at first I thought I'm going to buy a ticket to this, and, you know, it's going to feel like I bought a ticket to like a Gaspar Noé film or something like that, you know, or something that is like everyone's like, oh, this movie's really going to mess you up. But really, the date came closer, I didn't feel like a sense of dread, but more comfort, I guess. For me, the more normal death and the experience of dying feels, the more I'm able to sit with it. Like, to know other people have gone through it too. I remember one of the first times I realized that was me and my wife were watching Love on the Spectrum, and on a first date, two of them said to each other, Dead Dad Club, and that was like on their first date. After I heard that, I was like, huh, that's interesting. I feel a little warmer, like comforted now. Whereas I've broken down crying at just normal TV shows like that have just stress and out of control situations. Like there's an episode of The Studio, which is all in one shot. And then like some of the intense talks on that Dallas Cowboys cheerleader show, American Sweethearts, that I'm just like, oh, I need to go in the other room and cry because this is too much. But actual death, ooh, that feels good. If it's looked at genuinely and like, you know, approached that way. One of the reasons I was really interested in seeing this is that most stories about dementia I know tell it through the lens of like the family, the people who had to sit back and watch. Here, everything's centered on the experience of Ruth, which is really what I'm more interested in. This isn't not as much what I'm feeling now, but I definitely felt it very strongly closer to Dad's death, and leading up to it was how much he was able to perceive of his surroundings, and like, did he know what was going on even after his body stopped listening to him. For instance, like one doctor told us that we would probably have to give my dad the news that he was gonna die. We're gonna have to tell him that multiple times because he might not remember us having that conversation. While on the other hand, hospice nurses, multiple, told me that people in his condition hear and understand everything around them, even if they can't respond. Like, I heard very often the phrase, hearing as the last thing to go. Now, does that cope? Probably in part, but maybe there is truth to it. You know, people actually dealing with the person in their last moments, and then someone who is viewing it as a puzzle. And I still don't know if I'm grateful about this or not, but because of how fast Dad's disease went, neither he or I had to suffer through the kind of the slow motion breakdown most families have to struggle through when dealing with dementia. We didn't have to convince Dad that he needed to move into like a memory care unit of an assisted living home, for instance. By the time we finally got a diagnosis, he was already too far progressed for that to be any help anyways. But that surreal feeling, that feeling that happens when, you know, like you get in a car crash or when a family member or you is giving some sort of diagnosis that is scary. There's this struggle to process that it's real. And I think that is exactly what Familiar Touch is kind of talking about. More than anything, I think this is a coming of age story. It's just not about like puberty or moving to a new school, but it's just as inevitable and out of control as the leads' lives are in coming of age movies. It's about moving to a new place even when you don't want to, and the struggle of new routines and figuring out where you belong. And there's even a prom in Familiar Touch. I would call this movie earnest, and I think there's an added layer of authenticity to that as well, in that outside of the leads, the rest of the cast are residents of the retirement community where the movie was filmed. And not only were they cast, but they were crew as well, so they helped out behind the scenes to actually make the movie. The director has talked about how one of the inspirations for making this was her experience of putting her grandmother in a retirement facility. And even that phrase, like putting them in, that's an interesting verb. She said, quote, "I come from an intellectual family that places verbal acuity above other forms of knowing and relating. I noticed that as she became less and less verbal, we spoke about her as if she was less and less there. But as someone working with movement, she's also a choreographer, she was still so present to me through other forms of sense making, like touch, and through the rhythm, the way she'd rock her body. It was another form of self expression." And you see that a lot in this movie. There's a lot of tactileness. There's a lot of touch. Some of the vignettes are just, feeling your clothes, or like, like when you wake up in a hotel and you like don't know where you are, and that kind of light seeping in, like those kind of moments. Friedland also said, quote, "I wanted to make a film that looked at an older woman not through decline or sickness or death, but just as a study of her experience of self outside work, outside our stereotypes of what an old woman is, and to look at her desires and shifting sense of self in an aging space, but where that space doesn't define who she is." I think that she did succeed at that, because this doesn't feel like a movie about what happens when you're no longer human. This is a movie about when you transition into another stage in life, which you had previously thought would mean that everything is over. But the truth is that you're still alive and you're still experiencing life. And how do you make it work from there? What does life look like on the other side? Like, life changes outside of your control feel like a loss of power and like independence, but you're still alive. So what does it feel like to come to terms with a new normal? Like, that is an impossible normal. I feel like Familiar Touch approached this with clear eyes, and it really helped that they centered the journey of the person experiencing their new life and the disease, which made it not some sort of mournful rant about loss, but a look at death in the eyes and saying, okay, what's next? Well, those are my thoughts on Familiar Touch. I'm gonna try to do this semi regularly. So thanks so much for tuning in. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to leave them in the comments. And I'll see you guys next time. Okay, bye.